Welcome to the Enchoris Podcast, a podcast that is focused on giving some insight on what happens in Germany to everybody outside. We tend to not share enough of the knowledge and the things that are happening in Europe. We're so diverse that we forget to share what's happening from place to place, and we're trying to provide a window to the good things that happen here in Germany and the problems that are happening in the cultural sector. And today I have the joy to welcome Thomas Venker, an author, journalist, and we're going to talk a lot about all the different things he does. The context today will be the bankruptcy of pop, to put it in a simple term. And apart from the playfulness, we're going to talk about what a cultural landscape suffers from when pop culture and music journalism are not appreciated, financed, and supported as business models shift. Welcome, Thomas. Thank you for your time.
Thanks for having me.
And we're going to just go through your diverse portfolio and the complexities of an ever-switching pop industry in the last 20, 30 years. So let me start from saying that the main reason to write you and invite you was that you put out a magazine in printed form back in May.
Yes.
The Kaput magazine. And Kaput is an international word. I think even non-German speakers know the word. How did you decide to go there?
You mean with the word in general or with the print issue?
With the print issue.
Well, we exist for 10 years, and obviously after such a long time, you think like, maybe we should do a print issue. Should we do a print issue? And then we have a lot of younger staff writers and photographers these days, and they were like super excited when I said like, maybe we should do that. Yes, because they never experienced that. So for them, it's a big thing, and they were so into the idea that obviously it stimulated me. Then I told my partner, Linus Volkmann, and he's like, no fucking way. No way we are doing this. No. Why should we? I mean, digital, it's fast, it's easy to handle, it's not so costly. But then once I have an idea, I have to go for it. I mean, that's the deal. So
let's give our listeners and viewers a little bit of context. What is Kaput for someone who has no clue?
Kaput has a subtitle, which is very important. It's a magazine for insolvency and pop, insolvency and pop, which comes from the state that Linus and me, we worked for close to 15 years at Intro magazine, from 2000 till 2014. And it was a great ride. Music magazines were drifting. We had perfect years. And then for the last years, it already started at a crisis of the music industry, got also a crisis of the music journalists. Like Specs magazine stopped, Groove magazine later on stopped and went only digital. So a lot of like publications, NME in England the same, and US titles, you saw it everywhere in the world. So for the last 3 years of working at Intro, suddenly money was a very big topic. And money means also like, do we have to reduce the staff? Do we have to cut external writers and all that? So I got more and more sick with that vibe of you just talk about that and you have to come up with bad news to your friends. So that was also a reason why we both stopped working at Intro at one time. And then we never wanted to do a magazine again. But shortly later, we got a request from somebody which didn't lead somewhere, but it sent us on a journey to, let's do it different. Let's do a magazine without any meeting, which we still do. We don't have meetings. It's the Kaput rule number 1. There's no meetings for this magazine. We do everything like I act, he acts, he has his writers, I have my writers. We are just going with the flow for that. And it was obviously also important for us to talk with the artists, the writers, the photographers, everybody involved about the economic situation. How do we do what we do? How can we finance this life of culture? Like get all the projects on the road, get also not like having the feeling that you do things on the back of the others, still communicate well, transparency, all that. And that's all included in the subtitle. So we have a lot of conversations about pensions of the artists, about struggle when they are ill, all that stuff which comes up when you have an artistic life, which has obviously the highlight moments where everything runs great and you don't have to think about money. But we both know often shit happens, and then
health issues happen, financial things happen, and I realize more and more that the glorification of the life of musicians and artists, or of the other aspect of glorifying the suffering and the hardship, none of those two are healthy, and we have to treat people like humans and have a more honest music journalism perspective on how an artistic journey goes, because people only care about the 5 years someone's famous and the road there and the demise after that. And we need a better society where people can actually be creative and healthy in different ways. I found what you said really, really challenging, that you never have meetings. So I was reading through the magazine in the past years, and very often from a standpoint of content, there are concurrent and different approaches, and I think that's very diverse. What I mean by that, it's like there's not a strict line of how you approach content. It's very diverse what you write about, and in a very diverse style. So I think what you just described to me is how co-authorship and organic content development happens, that it's not based. I'll give you a bad example. It's not like the PR agency defines what the magazine would write about Britpop in those months. I know you can't even relate to that, but even the opposite narrative of something being only eclectic, but the diverse authorship about the scene, that's what I think is interesting. And I'm always interested in the workings of how something works. So can you elaborate a little bit more on how the magazine runs without the meetings and what that means on an authorship level?
I mean, I partly lied because we also do projects for customers, sometimes for museums, for festivals, and of course there's a need to a little communication we have with them. Obviously, if they want a meeting, they have a meeting, but even there we don't have it that much. But like for Kaput itself, it's true, we don't have that. I truly believe that what you just described with this diversity, that's exactly the interesting part about media these days, when you still believe in old media where people come to a website or read a magazine and all the content on the site is communicating with each other. The writers are communicating with each other. That's the best case, and that's also a good reason to go back to a print issue, because in a print issue you know that the people most likely go page by page and they see this one article and they maybe think like, how can they have an interview with a Palestinian filmmaker and a BDS story a few pages before? Like how is that fitting together? Oh, it's fitting very well together in my cultural life, because I believe in dialogue. And dialogue means also different opinions, but people talking and sharing them and discussing, and then maybe like coming closer, maybe not coming closer, but it's all part of cultural life or life in general. And therefore, I would not be interested in having like something where every article reads the same. I don't think we had meetings at Intro magazine, and we had more like a certain writer style and all that, but still we had significant roles of the writers and the photographers, which have their own style. And by that, it was different enough to give it like humanity. It was real. It's not like in the old days the Spiegel magazine had like somebody like editing everything, that everything sounded the same and there was no writer name below it. That's not what I want.
That would be the AI of the times, and censorship and conformity. What you said about diversity of opinion, I think that's exactly what's missing out in democracy. We don't need a polished, super virtue signaling or one side of the story. We need both sides of the story. We need the conflict to be clear. We need the solutions to be discussed, and we don't need people to agree, but we have to agree to talk. And I think anything else doesn't serve either democracy or is intellectually pleasing or authentic. Then it's just a placement within a narrative. And the same thing applies to music. I want to hear about the crazy jazz musician whose music I might not like, and a pop person that made a fantastic record that I wouldn't expect. That's also great, even though I would expect myself to prepare one or the other. And I think that's when the elitism goes out of the music and you just listen with your eyes and your soul, and then you're open to everything. How did the contributors of the magazine feel when they had the first copy and they saw their article printed?
I mean, all were pretty happy, and like nobody mailed me back and was like, oh, what did you do there and what's the context? They were all like pretty proud to be in a print issue, and also they liked the variety of the magazine. Yeah, for them it was a total kick, I think.
For me, it's interesting because I also worked at a magazine, at the Free Press magazine 20 years ago, and we used to have a release of a magazine every month. I was going every month to the printer. You saw the cover being cut before it was glued together. And then it gets to a point where after all this excitement about the internet, you get it in your hands and you're like, great. And it sits on your coffee table and you don't want to finish it. You just leave it there and you're going to read it in steps. And I don't want to go into nostalgia. The main aspect, life changes, life progresses. What I wanted to ask you is, did that change how people wrote? Because online, you don't have to think about space. You could write a 6-page Substack article as a blogger, and there's room for it. When you're within a print, you have limitations. How did you go about this in this area?
I mean, it was a mix. First off, I have to say, we're making a best of magazine. So we're just taking what we have and put it on the paper. But then, like pretty fast, we decided, no, we're gonna do a lot of new stuff. So of course, it was just written for that case, and later on went digital. But another thing I'm observing, and I don't mean that in any way bad for the younger generation, is the younger generation always thinks that the writing amount, the length of somebody has to be equal with the payments and the effort in something. So I'm a writer who always ends up with way too much writing. Like, for example, I just wrote, we have a cooperation with Goethe Institute, which is going to cover 10 essays on punk, 50 years of punk. Mm-hmm. So we have several writers for that. And I myself picked the topic. I wanted to read Japanese noise music as a punk gesture. So I started writing, and Goethe has like this idea of like 5,000 characters to maximum 8,000. That's what I asked him for. But I ended up writing, and I was in my writing tunnel, 31,000 characters.
Whoa.
So that's how I do. I think a lot of the younger generation would never go there. They would like already stop earlier, and they are much more controlled with that. And a lot of writers also like to write a shorter stuff, so they don't mind it that much. I think they even like it when I give them like 8,000, 10,000 characters, that's it. So the measuring is not so hard for them as it's for me. For me, it's always hell. Maybe that's also one reason why I decided at one point that I mostly publish my own work, like rather than what I did before, writing for a lot of newspapers, a lot of magazines, because then you always have to hustle with the editors, which is their job, and I totally respect it. But for me, it's really difficult. I have 31,000 characters on punk in Japan, and then I have to cut it down to 5,000. Really? How much do you hate me?
It's exactly the same with music. Some people write a 1-minute 50-second punk pop song and it's fantastic, and then there's a Brian Eno piece that goes for 10 years and it's equally good. And I think it's about authenticity, and it's about how someone dives into his own consciousness. And probably, I personally write extremely short. My favorite way to write would be like haiku poetry. If I could limit it to 5 words, it would be great. And of course, I can write more. But I'm trying to make a joke here, and
no, I get it.
I go to the opposite. But I think there is something about stream of consciousness when you write. And what I was just reading an article about the neuroscience of writing and what is going away with people not taking the time to write 30 pages like we used to do while we're studying. And it was about AI and how it limits how people write, handwrite or type. And I think there's a special zone you get after a certain point. And if you write about something exciting, like music, and you go into rabbit holes and you see different things converging, like how did one genre affect the other, or how for example, the record collecting habits in Japan allowed some really obscure artists to survive with really crazy forms of music. So it's a trip. And when I found out you print a magazine, it's obvious now in the podcast, I really thought about how do you take a medium that now moved to digital and go back to analog with the print? How long are the articles? And you answered already the logic. It's really, I think it would be really interesting to write a paper about the transition from digital to the print and going back to the work as it goes. It's and like I said, for me, it's not about nostalgia. It's about what you said about skill set, like writing.
I mean, it's also, if you look at the magazine, we are mostly running 8 to 10 page stories. So obviously, we just took what's there. If a good conversation is, I maybe edited out like 4 or 5 questions or something, but it's not like I take a long piece and I cut it down brutally, like as just described for the Japanese piece. Which, by the way, I was surprised it also works as a shortcut. It's interesting sometimes if you challenge yourself by the wishes of somebody else, like, okay, this also kind of makes sense. Now it's much more catchy. And for people who want to just like a short introduction, they get it. But I published also the long one and I got already great feedback and potentially a Japan invitation within 2 days coming from that. So sometimes the mad idea is also important that you just follow it, because we never know what's going to happen with what we produce anyway. Like I always, that's one thing I always tell also the younger generation, that most of my decisions in life were not like rational, like this is leading to that cultural effect, or I make that money with this thing. So often surprised the best project, also the nice incomes are coming by something which I never expect to lead anywhere. And the same goes for writing things like that. Like somebody might say, like, who's interested in that? But then you find that one person maybe be the perfect reader.
It's like if people who innovated in music were afraid about their audience, there wouldn't be a lot of the music produced. And what I found really interesting in the 50s is that A&R people were pushing artists to the limit, try new stuff, go outside your boundaries. That it was not a very product-oriented business. It was an exploration. Like an old A&R, artist and repertoire, manager would bring you in contact with a jazz band, so you have brass on your song. It would teach you to explore. And the pop industry became a lot about target audience. And what you say is actually true. You're creative for your own sake, but the whole process can go places anyway.
Because, I mean, of course, you can't see it as a general rule, but environmental-wise, like a lot of us who are in a relationship do a lot of things in their daily lives for one-to-one interaction, to touch the other person, to communicate with one other person, and that's it. When we go to our workplace, we suddenly think, like, because capitalism kicks in, we have to reach as many people as possible. We have to have a wide audience. Yeah, well, why does my writing, which is a very emotional act also, it's also a functional act sometimes, it's also an economic act, but it can be a very emotional act. Why does it have to reach more than one person? If you just play it through like that, sometimes you write for 10 people, sometimes you write for 100,000 people. Both is totally legit.
It's also very hard to prove. I always use cooking for that. Like making bread is a good example. Like people experimented with seeds, breaking them. We take things for granted that are completely random experiments that led to something over years. And the society, especially in a profit-oriented capitalist system, is focused on fast profit, and we need more exploration. And art is actually, for me, that in society, it's just a room to experiment and create new things that will transform it like a catalyst. You also published a book lately called Talking to Americans, since we're talking about the journey. Mm-hmm. I haven't read the book. I just read about the book, to be honest. But I like the premise. So you went to the States and you tried to see how people are after the election of the current president. If I understood that, how America was changing in the past years.
The book was actually produced in 2018, in the fall of 2018, and published in 2019. And then the pandemic came and like kind of sabotaged a lot of like the ideas we had to present it. It based on me working together with Jonathan Forsyte, a photographer from New York and a good friend of mine. Over the years, I met him, I think, somehow in the noughties, and then he became my New York photographer. So every time I went to the States, sometimes he came also to other cities when I was doing something for intro in Chicago or Detroit, and we always dreamt like, oh, we should do something else, not just these arranged meetings where I do an interview and he does a photo, like where everything is scheduled. Or even if sometimes you organize it yourself, but it's still 3 hours or 4 hours maybe in the life of a person, and that's it. And the person knows before you're coming. So it's all about mostly in a record, a book or a film or something like that. So we dreamt of like talking to normal people, whatever that is. And then, my girlfriend, she's an artist. She had a residency in Kyoto, Japan for 3 months. And obviously I wanted to join, but hey, you can't join all 3 months. That would be a little too close, like just like hanging in there. So I decided, hey, that's a good moment. Let's do it. And we met in New York. We rented a car, and the idea was to drive from New York to San Francisco in 3 weeks and stop every day in a city, most likely we've never been to, or like we try to cover a lot of regions where both of us were interested in, never been to. Open the door, walk around, look into eyes, and then decide this person I'm gonna chat up. And it was really brutal in the beginning, because even so, if it doesn't give the impression I'm a shy person, like we all are shy persons, especially like talking up strangers on the street, it's a difficult thing. So we made one test run in New York the day before we started, and it was absolutely hell. Like 4 young kids trying to beat me down for like, what the fuck you want from us? Like people like looking at me like, really? Why should I talk to you? So like we didn't score any talk in New York the day before. So I slept the last night before we went on travels like, this was a really terrible idea. It's not going to work out. And then the next day we drove to Philly, and I will never forget, we stopped the car close to the river, and we went down to the river, and there was this Afro-American couple, and they were like fishing together and drinking a bottle of wine, and we chatted them up, and they were totally up into it. And 10 minutes in the talk, she shares really private stuff with me, like my son is in prison, and how did he end up, and like all that, like on her perspective. And he talked about him being a drummer in the old days. And then she looked at him like they were a couple for over 10 years. You were a musician? And there was, for me, there was like one of these moments where you realize your idea is A, working, and B, it's crazy how people sometimes communicate and how often it helps to have a third person intercommunication, talking about what we talked before about, like how do we go into dialogues in our worlds, and how much are we on just like certain passes of speaking with each other, and suddenly there's a person who has a different angle, and a whole new world in a relationship that is so close is opens because somebody triggers that other way of talking with each other. And I think that's what we all can take from something like that. And obviously for me, it was a sign of, okay, there's a lot of things waiting to be talked about in the lives of a lot of people. And we went on having 53 conversations over the next week. Most, like pretty much every conversation made it in the book. So it was really a life-changing journey also for me, because it showed me also when it comes to America and the political situation right now, you see so many people I talk to, I would say, are definitely not on my political side, and they have really weird perspectives sometimes, but none of them didn't talk to me. And we always had like from 10 to 30 minutes conversations, which were really, really there. And also there was no fight in that conversation. There were different perspectives. You could see sometimes the other person was thinking like, really a weirdo, this German guy in front of me. But it worked as a conversation, yeah.
We had a guest Jürgen Eninger from Munich, a few weeks ago, and he was talking about managing a city. And what he said is like, for any unsolved problem in managing a city, you probably haven't talked to everybody yet. And meaning talking to the people you would never mingle with, who are from other parts of the spectrum politically. And I think what you're addressing here is that we have to really be open in society and talk to people we fundamentally disagree with. The moment we stop talking, it gets into civil war territory, and it gets into dehumanizing the other side. And so the humanity of us, if that gets lost, then I'm worried. And people and narratives, we learned the lesson really hard here in Europe in many ways in the last century about how bad things can go, or the civil wars in Spain, Greece, fascism rising. So, but the important thing is to stay human and be open for a meaningful talk. And that's also the value music had for me, that people are really open to listening to. I'll give an example. There was country music in Germany, and we listened to diverse forms of music from Africa, how the desert inspired guitar playing in a completely different way. So we can connect over that. So, and you did it with really interesting timing before Corona. So you saw a different, the world in a phase before everything changed for a while with this book.
Yes.
That's the, I don't want to make a statement, but timing is really interesting with art. It's equally important to the idea sometimes, in what moment something happens.
Yeah, that's why it was so sad that we couldn't do everything we had in mind once the book is produced. In a way, I'm coming back with that now, with that Goethe thing, because I'm going to do a talk tour in the US, like a talk listening tour, like going to different cities, playing the music of that city, of the community there, and talking with one of the protagonists about like the punk scene there, but also beyond the punk scene, the current state of US society, and like the interaction between like cultural communities and the political aspects, but also like how people lived a long biography also in communities. Because often we just look into it and there's a certain act or a certain band, an artist at one time, and we think that's it. But you described it earlier, there's not just the 5 years it's happening, there's also 40 other years or something of an artistic life, or even longer, and that's fascinating to me. So I'm gonna most likely sit down with people I had communication for the first time in the early 90s by writing postcards and sending VHS tapes, and now we are in a totally digital world, and we're sitting on a stage together and listening to music and talking about the changes from that, but also the similarities and what we took, and also how important it was to go through a lot of these, the case of us older people, like these years where communication was really a very, very special thing, like having contact with somebody in San Francisco. I'm pretty much sure I was the only kid in my school who had that. Mm-hmm. Today, it's pretty easy that most of the kids have contact with people all over the world.
I was in Minneapolis before things happened. I was there until 2 days before the ICE incidents happened. And I was really touched by how strong everything that happened, the solidarity and everything, was linked to the punk roots of the city and bands I was listening to, and how much of the community and the music scene there was being fundamentally involved in everything. And then you see that you go from a Replacements album or from Bob Mould and Husker Du, and then you realize that the venues that are doing stuff go back to those places. And it was what you said resonated with me, and I realized that I had a moment there where I dug into the history of the city and how that affects the resistance of a city and the culture of a city, and how deeply ingrained music is as a connector for places. Like, that was for me a very interesting, unusual experience, because I had to reflect on the music history of a place as how it relates to the political situation. Anyway, that's very, very, very interesting talk in itself, how a journey like that can be. What do you think about the book now, 6-7 years later after the trip? Because it almost feels like you're going to give it a second wind.
Well, I mean, these are conversations with people about their lives, so I think it's never getting old. This book is there to stay and for a new reader, it's going to feel fresh every day. So I think nothing in that book, like sometimes if with cultural talks, especially when they're about a new album or a new film or something, they are very much about zeitgeist too. That book has not that problem. It's there to stay.
Okay, you got me interesting. I have to read the book now since we talked so much about it without having read.
I can give you a copy, of course.
That sounds fantastic. Yes. Thank you. Let's move to other things you do with Kaput. Recently, I came to a concert you did with the band Mag in a new space in town. What do you think about small venues and opportunities for people to perform as emerging artists or as really experimental projects?
I mean, small venues are obviously very, very important for artists who not made it yet to a stage where they can fill a real club with maybe 100, 200 or like real capacities, 500-800. So that's the first thing. In that case, it's Kaput. It's a venue I organized together with my partner Sarah Sjesny and Matthias Kaiser when it comes to the music series. It's also a reaction from us on the vibes out there right now. I felt like more and more things around me are not working anymore, are cut down, are silenced. And this particular room, it was a side room we had rented out for 4 years. We felt like, okay, it's about time to make and organize a community space again where people can gather. There's also not like this kind of like you have to book that it's making so much money. It's not about entrance. It's not about like fees or stuff like that. It's more likely, first of all, it's about community in a space where people come in contact, which are normally not so easy coming in contact. Because as weird as it sounds, but I'm very active in the art world through my partner, but also in the music world, which is my world for like since the late 80s. And I found it irritating often that people don't share my interest, like going to that 2 exhibitions. Like, for example, I was just in Amsterdam for Dekmantel Festival. And for me, it's as important to see every exhibition in town when I'm there as seeing the sets and listening to the artists, because both are my worlds. And then often you find it like, oh, okay, the music people are not really going to the exhibitions, and the artists, for sure, the art people are not going to the concerts. And with that space, I think we try to cultivate a mixture zone, and I found that it's easier with the music people interesting than the art people. They are more skeptical to go on the other side or go to come to the concerts. So the concept of the venue is that we have a show going on for mostly 6 to 8 weeks, always an exhibition. And then within the exhibition, we do concerts, performances, readings, talks to activate. I think that's the word these days to use the space, but most likely it's also a reason why people coming in, because normally people come to the opening and to the closing maybe, and then you sit most of the time with your laptop in a gallery and like nobody shows up and you just do your work on the laptop. With that concerts, I have the feeling there's a good reason, and so far it works really nice that people are showing up. We have a gathering, they watch the art, they watch the concert. And so it's a win-win for both sides, and it's most likely also a nice like reason to meet with people. So a lot of my friends I see lately much more often than before, because they come to the things.
I'm thinking about how music being so commercial and I mean successfully commercial until 2010, that there were so many venues, that the communal spaces kind of took a step back because there was so much offering. And maybe now it's a good point to for things to happen more organically. And I think the mixture with the art scene is really fitting, because there's also a new audience that is interested in an aesthetic experience, not necessarily music or art, but they're out to see something more analog. I had the experience with young people that they really crave something tangible and not something that is only online. And at the moment, the really interesting trend is that there's a lot of mega events for mainstream music, and people want a more personal experience very often. I mean, there's the club experience between 500 and 2,000, and people tend to want to see a band while it's happening in the beginning. That's not easy for a band to survive financially, but people miss that experience of watching something in a more personal space.
Yeah, and it's also more stimulating for them. Like if I look at my own biography, I had the luck that in the late 80s, it was before Nirvana, it was before the breakthrough of guitar music. There's a lot of good books about that. And they are describing a situation that most of the concerts happened in Jugendhäusern, we say in German, like social clubs, youth clubs, where like one social worker was giving other people the chance to book these bands. So there was no commercial clubs yet who were interested in it because there was not yet enough money in the game. So that changed the year punk broke. There's a good movie about that from Dave Barkley from Los Angeles, who toured with Nirvana and Sonic Youth in that particular year before indie music became so big that it was suddenly a big market, the A&Rs of the big labels kind. And all that changed also the live industry a lot. And going back to that smaller places, it's also empowering. Like I helped organizing concerts. It gave me the idea of you can do everything yourself. Do it yourself. It's possible. And I think a lot of that got lost over the years with like things being so big that obviously it's much more complicated to imagine I can do that. I'm the 16-year-old, I'm the 18-year-old. But yeah, if you step back, it's possible. In my case, I have to say, as you brought it up, also the artists have to make money. They have to have survived. That's something you don't think about when you're 16 because you most likely eat at home still and you sleep at home, so the money aspect is not so much in front. So I'm really grateful that, for example, we have this great funding possibilities in Germany. We got funded for the exhibition from Kunststiftung NRW, we got funding from Musikfonds for the music series, we got funding from the Kulturamt der Stadt Köln, and this is really important to do small places and still be able to pay the artists fair. Also put enough energy and time in, like a nice hotel, okay travels, and a good dinner with them, and all that stuff, which is also important for me as a host to have. Like if you don't have that, then obviously it's much rougher because then you have to convince people from a DIY idea of maybe like and we let a little box go around, and then you know yourself like, oh my God, only 35 euros in that box. How did that happen? So it's great that we have the funding, and that's why we have to fight for that to keep staying with us because it's under pressure.
What people don't realize is that there are so many direct and indirect effects of subculture stabilizing a city. For example, there are many studies that almost 40% of the money invested in small subcultural things comes back to society because the hotel gets paid, the restaurant gets paid. So it keeps the city alive and the money keeps circulating. So it's not spent on this abstract idea of art that makes no sense on a practical level. So we need to keep funding because it stabilizes not only the art ecosystem, but it keeps the city alive. Anybody who's been in cities, even the medium cities around 50,000 to 100,000 inhabitants in Germany, you see boarded up centers. And a small communal experience would keep the center of the city occupied. The kids won't go to the mall, but they would go to something that has a cultural offering. So there's a lot of value and funding from the jazz festival to the small suburban gallery. I think we should keep that alive in Europe, not because we have the interest of working in this industry, but we work in this industry because we think that makes a difference. So funding is essential, and it's not a luxury like a lot of people want to portray it in the media. I think it's a necessity, just like education and health. And I think it's actually equally important for a person to be healthy.
That's also a brutal thing when you look at the prices of a lot of like culture these days, how far it is away from regular people with regular incomes. Like in Amsterdam, the museums were 25 euros or more. Like who should be able to afford it if you're like not coming from money, or you're like not like really involved into art world where you get it for free, the entrance. It's a big problem. The same goes for show prices, for festival prices. Everything is really expensive. That's why we with the room pretty much like people give what they can give, like in a sense, because it's important that you have spaces like that, and without funding that's not possible. But I think it's really important to offer people that, because if you don't have that, you never have contact with different perspectives. Different artists from all over the world opened my view on the world. I was never thinking of like, oh, Germany or Stuttgart in my case, that's the horizon. Like I early on through like indie music, hardcore music, had contact with people from the States and England. And then I started getting interested also in Asian culture, films, mostly from Hong Kong, from Japan, from Korea. So that shows you the world is existing and there's interesting people there. Then you dig into their stories, in their narratives, and suddenly your whole stimulation is a worldwide stimulation. If that's not happening, your whole stimulation is Stuttgart. Imagine
Stuttgart is wonderful as it is, with all its... I almost ended up living there as a child. It was between Graz and Stuttgart, and we ended up in Austria.
Isn't there this great single from Metabolismus together with Kim Foley, Lost in Stuttgart? When they were on tour and they were lost in Stuttgart, yeah. I think something like that. Yeah,
it's funding for the arts is a really important issue at the timing we're talking here at the podcast. And let's jump to one of the other things you did in the last years that was on a completely different scale, on the Monheim Triennale. For people outside Nordrhein-Westphalia and NRW, the Mörs Festival and the Monheim Triennale are two smaller cities in a very, very crowded, with big cities landscape. And they managed to create a small artistic oasis in different ways. So what do you think that it's a city in between Cologne and Düsseldorf for those who don't know where that city is? How did that come about? And what idea led there? How did that start? I genuinely don't know.
Well, for me, it started with a request by Rainer Michalke, who was the artistic, or is still the artistic director of the festival. He was running Mörs Festival before that, and he's also very involved as the artistic director of Stadtgarten, the very important Cologne concert venue, but also like way over Cologne. Like it's important for the whole jazz scene in Europe and I think worldwide, because it also enabled a lot of mostly American, but also international, like Scandinavian artists, their first gigs here in the country, and helped building up careers. So he was asked by the back then mayor Zimmermann from Monheim to come up with a festival idea for the town, and he concepted that idea, and I was lucky that he contacted me early on in that process. So I started having conversations with him in 2018 and working from 2019 on for the festival. I'm still officially on the payroll, but I think this is the last year because we had an election in Monheim, so the festival most likely is not gonna happen again. It was for me a great ride because I was curating my own shows with Kaput, obviously. We do this Talking Kaput series in the Stadtgarten and the Green Room every summer. We did a lot of like concerts here and there, and I do it now with Kaput Scene, obviously curating, but I didn't curate something on that scale of the Monheim Triennale. And Rainer had this idea to ask me for the whole like media part of it. So I'm doing all the interviews for the website. We did publications. We ran a book where we talked to the artists. We had a lot of talks during the festival themselves on stages. All the journalistic part was handled by me. And I was also co-curator, but the concept was we are like a board of curators. So it was really nice, like 5 international curators who met and formed the idea. The idea was to invite single artists, like a singular person, rather not bands or something. They can come with a band for a signature project, but first off, we asked them because of their uniqueness as an artist. And I remember the first time we ended up with having a long list of 1,000 acts or something, and we shortened it down to 300. And I have listened madly for a week through all that list of the other artists, other curators too. And for me, it was like mind blowing because we had like all different corners of, you would think it's a easy landscape of avant-garde, electronic, jazz music, but it's so big and huge. And once you dig into that, it's inspiring to see how much you don't know, even if you're full-time music journalist and you listen to music all the time and you read all the time. There's so much to explore. And that was my first thing I took out of that festival, like this, wow, so great still how much you can discover every day if you have the opportunities. And we formed the idea to invite always 16 artists for 2 years in a row. First year, they come together, they improvise, they maybe play solo stuff. The second year, they had the possibility to present a huge signature project they were dreaming of for a long time, invite other artists. So we had this bunch of artists coming in the summer for a week to town twice, 2 years in a row. And that, I think it was for the city also a great thing for the younger people there, because we also did like school project at the music school there where the artists play together. It was a lot of stimulation for the city. And as described before, that opens the horizon of a 12-year-old if he has the possibility to make music with Peter Evans in a workshop. Listens to that trumpet player, but also listens to that man talking about art and the world. And even most of them didn't speak English at that time. They were younger kids, but they get it. They get something else is possible outside of Monheim. The same as something is possible outside of Stuttgart. So it's really interesting what you can do in a city like that, because in the beginning, obviously, everybody's like skeptical, but then you win them over one by one. And it took us some years. In 2020, 2021, I was not sure if this is going to work out, but the last edition in 2025 was really, really beautiful. And I had the feeling we are on a peaking point that it's working out fantastically. Like there were people coming from other festivals worldwide visiting and looking at it. The artists were enthusiastic anyway. They were like, they totally understand the chances a concept like that gives them. So for us, it's quite brutal that it's ending now, because I think it's at the point where, you said it before in a private conversation, how can you stop something which is obviously working out so well?
Yeah, it's you're almost in a form of denial as an art-loving person. You're like, why? And even from a socioeconomic and political perspective, it's very hard for me to understand. But that's also why we talk about those things, because there should be a discussion on where we put our priorities.
Yes.
And it's times of war, inflation, but what are we destroying from what's being built up if we ignore art and if we come? It's a very complicated time in human history, in my view, but that's why we're here talking. We're trying to remind, or at least that's my motivation, to talk about what I think is important. And I think a small city has so much life when you make a festival, even if in the beginning people cannot relate. It's not, they feel it's not everything is for them. But gradually, by integrating everyone in a city, you make it a special event. I've been to festival in small cities, and it becomes part of their identity, and people are looking forward to that, not simply because the small kiosk will have business or the restaurants are going to be full, but they're proud of their place and they're proud that something is happening. So it's identity building. You give people value they have a reason to stay, they have a reason to contribute. And that's how you stop also centrification. Not everybody has to move to Berlin, apart the fact that those times are over. But it's important to also stay where you are and do. And I'm someone who moved from one country to the other, so who am I to talk? But it's nice to give people an opportunity to stay where they grew up, get inspired, and also be proud of the place they grew up. That they feel like I was at that festival when I was 12 and I heard those famous trumpet players, and now they're world famous. Back then nobody knew them. There's a beautiful story to that.
When I'm traveling to festivals and I have to leave early, I always make sure to give my wristband to a young kid in that city and tell them like go in there and just listen to something. If you think it's really weird and it's shitty, keep listening. It might change something.
It's crazy. I don't think we can even remember what it was like being young and not. After a point, I think as a listener, you make a conscious choice to be open to. You don't want to be pleased. You just want to hear what the musician has to offer, even if it's not your thing. And the journey back to the discovery of how a child listens to music is, I think it's a full circle. You go back to the naivety and the openness of a child after really digging into music for life. So I guess the whole problem with the festival scene is that people think that because the big festivals or the super events have a lot of attendance, that everything should be done with a profit mentality. I really don't know the politics of what happened specifically there, but I think that what I've seen is that people assume that art can be extremely profitable based on narratives that were valid maybe 50 years ago. Like, not every opera house will have the fame of Maria Callas. We're not in those times. We're in a time where there's a lot more artists, different business models, and life is far more expensive than it used to be for everybody involved. Let's go back to the magazine. Will you make a second issue in print after this one in the future? I'm not going to hold you accountable to your.
Excuse me, I didn't hear you. Hello, anybody here?
Okay, I'll go into denial and pretend I didn't ask for that.
I don't know yet. I mean, on the way, obviously the costs exploded, and like not every experience was also the best in my life. But that's totally normal if you make a one-off or like a re-jump into a big project like that. It's a journey, and so right now I'm just happy we did that and we enjoy that, and it's circulating. It's also great to see the feedback to the magazine. Also, it opened a lot of doors that people suddenly understood us or saw us even, and maybe took us more serious because they also have a print magazine now, even if it's just a one-off or maybe a regular but in an unregular rhythm. It definitely helped shaping the idea after 10 years of Kaput again. But yeah, it was a lot of work. Also, I have to say here, the magazine is in English, and every article was in English, which was a big discussion within the ridership too, because a lot of writers write about German stuff, which we obviously just publish in German on the website. So somebody had to translate everything into English. A lot of the stuff I did, thank God, he sent me a perfect translator who helped me with the bigger pieces, and I have a very good English editor who always looks after all the English content to make sure it sounds native approached. But that was a big ride too, because in the end it was 550,000 characters, this magazine. That's a lot in English, and I learned a lot on that way.
German music journalism has a very strong tradition after the Second World War, and I think one of the things that have gone lost with everything moving to the internet is that, apart from that, we love people suggesting things to us, and I think music journalism had the magic of opening a door. I remember reading stuff when I was younger and thinking, I don't know if you just saw the cover and of an album and you saw an interview or an article and you were like, okay, I'll go down this rabbit hole. And I think we are losing a lot of the curational capacity that was coming along with music journalism. And I'm wondering, what way do you think we could find so that the value of that storytelling doesn't go lost in times of digital providers? I have no simple answer myself to this question, but...
I mean, surprisingly, there's a lot of great young writers of a new generation who are going into music journalism, even though it's a tough field and you can pretty much just make money if you also work for the radio, which is like one of the last corners where there's a little bit of money, but even they cut down quite brutal. And so if you really go into that, you really want it. And there's so many talented ones. And I think they also write so much better in a younger age than, for example, me. When I started writing, I didn't think it was a career. I just wrote in my first fanzine, and I learned it on the way that this is even possible, that I can make money with that. But it took me some time until I would say the writing was there. And sometimes I'm surprised how good they write, like in a young age, and they have the capacity also to write longer pieces. They ignore, maybe as much as I ignore often, that you should write very short and on point on the internet. They go for long things. So I don't think we have a problem with people not willing to tell the stories and tell them good. Obviously, it's harder to find the readers and the listeners for these long stories. But then again, yeah, like, what is a good audience? What is a big audience? What is the right audience? I found it always, like, we were thinking about that when we did Intro magazine back in the days. We had 150,000 magazines every month at a high of the magazine. So even more were reading it because it was for free and it was laying around in bars. So let's say maybe you had 250,000 readers a month. What does that number mean to me anyway? Like, I'm coming back to what I said earlier. Sometimes it's like that one person who reads it and chats for half an hour with you about that article. It makes your day. So it's very difficult to say where in between that the culture is alive and the culture is not alive. I think we still have a lot of people who are into it. We have a lot of people who restart going into it, as you also described. This younger generation, like, they are searching for the concert where they have contact with the artist, where they can see it like close by, where they can talk maybe later on, where not everything is like on a stage and not catchable. Of course, we also have the other phenomena. We have like people who make a selfie and the big stages in the background, and Rosalia performs there, and these 30 seconds are enough of like how deep I go into all of that. So I'm not pessimistic about that. It's rather the question, which also leads to Kaput, Magazine for Insolvency and Pop. How do we finance that? And that's getting harder and harder. How do I finance being a cultural journalist these days without losing my energy in a lot of bureaucracy on the side where you maybe get fundings, or you have like partners you work with on projects? A lot of that stuff is bureaucracy. It's not like creatively as you had when you had like a market, when Intro was running well. And as always, you just get it when it's over. Like in the good years of music journalism, I just worked completely on music journalism because the money was coming in. We didn't have to hustle for how do we find financing for the magazine. It was there. So we could concentrate 100% music journalism.
To provide some context on what you're saying, whether you're a new music ensemble, a solo artist, or a jazz ensemble wanting to make a record, at the moment there's a lot of funding options, thankfully, still in Europe, but the amount of work that has to be done, and for anybody who cannot imagine what that's like, most people have to document how they spend their funding with the accuracy you would have to do procurement in a very serious situation, like every receipt has to be kept. And artists and people have to end up doing a lot of bureaucratic work and on a very high level. So there's a lot of work, and just like you said, a musician in a new music ensemble would prefer to focus on improving his craft, and by design he's more talented than that and not at the Excel part of things to make it funny. But it's not funny when it's a legal procedure and a lot of work. And there's a lot of initiatives at the moment in Germany to make bureaucracy less stagnant for creative people. And there's pressure and lobbying to get there. Nobody's working proactively in creating that, but that would be the right way to fund things, in my opinion. It's to make it a transparent process and provide value so people can do their job. And with a lot of competition, it's always the problem. Who gets it, who doesn't? I don't have a solution, but bureaucracy is really a problem.
Yeah, often I feel like at the end of any funding process, if it's a concert series or if it's magazines are sadly not funded because we are not funding journalism in Germany because it would be against the freedom of press, which is a weird construction. But this is a topic for a talk by itself. But I found often, like, why is the result, the cultural result, not just speaking as that's proof the money was used well. Because if you organize 16 concerts or something and the people were on stage and they were obviously paid to be on that stage, yeah, you made it. Like, but then you have to go into, like, as you said, like every little thing, and then suddenly you're like 10 hours later with that. So, but again, it's like yeah, we get the money, so maybe that's part of the deal, and you have to take that. But it's definitely it changed a lot, much more bureaucracy, and I'm really good with organizing stuff, and I don't mind paperwork, but this is sometimes it's just nuts.
There's some kid out there who's super talented at something who will not make it because it won't be able to do that work. And I think that's what we should be worried about. Some super talented trumpet player who will never send in a document because he's not good at writing. Or so how do we go about the most talented of people in society who might not have a degree in social science or engineering or something parallel to their interest in art, but who are generally some of the most talented people. And I think that gets lost. That little kid with a skateboard who is an unusually talented painter but will never find out, or he finds out and he can get a job to finance it. So I think that's the challenge. What are we losing with all this?
The funny thing is, I never understood until I just go into and ask for fundings and maybe work with funding for 7-8 years or something like that. So before that, I never had contact with that kind of world. But I always wondered, like, what is culture management? Why are people studying cultural management? What is that all about? Because I was so naive. I was like first in a very DIY world, and then in the privileged form of music business was working as a business. So there was money coming in through being a business. You didn't think about like all this fuss around with funding and stuff like that. So only through the funding I realized, okay, culture management means you are able to handle the bureaucracy. That's it.
It's the reason we're having this podcast, to talk about that stuff, because I think this podcast in itself applies to a lot of the things you said. It's not made for a broad audience. It's made for someone who's interested in a niche issue. But I think a lot of musicians I talk to and a lot of people we work with, I sense their frustration with the load of with the workload they get in order to get funded, and it becomes a very unbalanced portfolio. And it's important to have this discussion, and you have the experience of moving through different phases of the music industry. So I think having experienced all those transitions actually gives a good outline. I always try to have some takeaways, and I will not forget, we could write about music. I was focusing on my craft. I was putting my energy in the right spot, what you said earlier. And I think that's important, that a as a society, I would love that we give people the chance to focus on what they're good at so they can provide the maximum value. And that would improve a society. And I'm not making a plaidoyer here. We're just trying to have a discussion about it.
It's also not just to think we are special. It's not just about us creatives. The same goes for people who work in the administration. If they have less of the unnecessary stuff, they could maybe just take the phone much more often, just call you and have conversations with the people, and then you wouldn't have like these two worlds, like not talking to each other. We are coming back to what we talked a lot about here, about dialogue. They would have like the possibilities in their daily lives to interact in dialogue and maybe help like closing bridges, but also optimizing processes, because they are stuck in the same thing. They are in meetings actually, which I denied to have. Like most people I know who work in serious jobs on that level, they have so many meetings, and they have so much to write in like resumes or in protocols, which obviously nobody ever reads. Like when was the last time you read a protocol of a meeting?
You don't.
Never. Nobody does. This is maybe also a takeaway from here. It's knowledge. Nobody does.
At the moment, there's an effort. There's the Creative Bureaucracy Festival, and people might laugh. You did.
Yeah, I did.
But the idea is that they're trying to put. There's some really talented people who go into public administration or corporations, and they get burnout. They can't contribute. They feel like their work is simply documenting something no one will read, like you said. And I think we have to make even the most boring parts or uncool. Like, it's cool to be an artist. For me, it's equally cool to be someone who works at administration and finds solutions. For me, it's equally important.
Without the people who do that, the creativity can't happen. So we have to stop thinking that this is the cool world and this is the uncool world. We have to understand we are part of the same biotope, and somebody chooses the other side because maybe the talent is there.
And that's what I said. We're going to try to cover this in the podcast in the future, the whole concept of creative bureaucracy, because it addresses the paradox. And when it comes, for example, to funding of the arts, if the people who build up the processes make it more user-friendly for themselves, the people who do the applications, understanding the needs of artists, having a service design approach to it, we would have a better result. And of course, this is chasing the ideal and utopian optimization, but we have to work in a direction to improve things. And for me, that's the whole re-engineering process we have to make as a society. And it's a democracy problem, it's a skill problem, it's a systemic problem with no easy solution. But if we all work together, it can get better, despite and we see that the big investments and the promise of capitalism in the form of everything should be profit-oriented is not working, even in the countries who have the biggest GDPs for everyone. So I think life will change, not necessarily always one step forward, but that's what bothers me about the issue, and that's why we're here talking. So that's Bernie barking. That's usually the sign that we got to 1 hour and 10 minutes or something. Thomas, thank you for taking the time.
Thanks for having me.
Is there anything you would like to announce or share? We're doing this before the holiday start, so
I'm ready for holiday, so I'm gonna listen to that when it's up on the air.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks for having me again.